Bop bop. Beep bop bop.
Hey. Hi guys.
Hello. Oh my.
Welcome back to another episode of Beaker Bros, where we drink out of beakers.
Because we're bros.
It may sound weird, thoughtier today.
Yeah.
It's because Sohnia and I are in a car.
We are. We decided to change it up a little bit.
Trying to do carpool
Podcast. Yeah.
Carpool podcast. Like carpool karaoke, but podcast.
Oh, what a long line.
So we're first gonna start by going to McDonald's. You may be wondering, what is this episode even about? Cars? Nah.
Not even the slightest.
Hi there, are you collecting corn?
No, I'm not.
Okay, what can I get for you?
Can I get 2 small Cokes, please?
Sure, anything else?
No, that's it.
Please, thank you.
Yep. It's just been 6 minutes of
us trying to get into the drive-thru. I mean, at least we know how long it takes to get 2 small Cokes.
yeah.
Yep, 2 small Cokes.
There you go.
Great, thank you.
Have a good one.
You as well.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, so Sohnia and I have gotten our 2 small Cokes. Back to our carpool podcast. Today's episode is honestly a very important one. I know we say interesting, but this is very important. I think that is. We really need to emphasize.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to kind of introduce it, Sohnia?
Yeah, so given everything that's going on in the United States right now, on June 24th, 2022, the Supreme Court ruled that the Roe versus Wade outcome, which granted women in the United States rights to accessing abortion and abortion services. As of June 24th, 2022, that has been overturned. So women in the United States no longer have universal, rights to accessing, again, abortion and abortion services. So we're going to be talking about that and a little bit of the science behind abortions. And for this episode in particular, we have a very special guest. We've both been wanting to have her on the podcast for a very long time. Her name is Izabela, and she was recently licensed as a midwife here in Ontario, Canada. Mm-hmm. So she has a wealth of knowledge about how abortions work. So we're going to be interviewing her a little bit and getting some of her input.
Mm-hmm. I think we also should say that after I don't know the right word.
Overturning. Did I say overruling?
No, I said it.
Okay.
Yeah. The overturning of the Roe versus Wade, it has greatly impacted women's rights in the U.S. and especially a women's right to their choices regarding their own bodies.
Their autonomy, everything.
Exactly. Should we state our stance here?
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to be like, I think I can speak for Sohnia and I, both saying that we are very much believers in that every woman should have their own choice of whether or not to get an abortion based on their own beliefs. That is what it is. Every woman gets to choose for themselves.
Yeah.
So I think what we should start off is, so as Canadians, we're not quite familiar with what Roe versus Wade is. Mm-hmm. And Sohnia and I spent quite a bit trying to really understand it. But we really should get into
the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah.
So what exactly that means and sort of the little idiosyncrasies that isn't necessarily talked about in the media.
Mm-hmm. Just kind of disclaimer, Sohnia and I really did try our best to understand this. So if we're saying anything wrong, feel free to call us out.
Yeah, and another thing, sorry I cut you off there. Everything that we are going to say has been cited. Just putting that out there.
Right out there. So basically, what is the Roe versus Wade thing, and how did it first start? So about 50 years ago, originally, the state had forbade abortions as unconstitutional, except when the mother's life was in danger. That's the only time abortions were considered allowed.
In the United States.
In the United States, yes, that's correct. But it wasn't until a pregnant woman of 3 children had actually tried to appeal this and was trying to claim that abortions went against the U.S. Constitution because it infringed a woman's right to privacy. And so as a result, the governments, they did vote in favor of this woman. The governments from there on lacked the power to prohibit abortions.
Yeah.
Fast forward to now, where Roe versus Wade is now overturned because it was argued that there's no reference to abortions in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. And I think, sorry, one thing, did you say it was a Supreme Court ruling?
Oh yeah, sorry, the Supreme Court ruling. I should do emphasize that because it means it affects
all U.S. states.
Yes, all U.S. states, not just one state, but all U.S. states.
Yeah.
So as a result of this overturning, it is now expected. I know it could be like, oh, like yeah, whatever, like it got overturned. What does that mean? It now means that, as I think a certain study did, like a research kind of thing. Did research into
a certain study did research. Okay.
A study looked into the probability of like the states and what they would be like, what states would kind of be banned in abortion laws, and it was predicted that 26 states will, or most likely will, be banning abortion. But yeah, that's just kind of me trying to shine light on the, what's that word?
The issue?
The intensity of this issue kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So with all that being said, now we, I guess, have a decent understanding, or like, I guess, a surface level understanding of what the Roe versus Wade case is.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Roe is the pseudonym of the person, of the mom that...
The pregnant woman, yeah, of three.
Of three.
It was like Jane Roe is what they kind of used. That was a bumpy one.
But another thing, so now that we have an understanding of that, I want to flash over to Izabela for a little bit of an overview of what abortions are.
Alrighty, so we're joined here today by Izabela. Izabela, do you want to give a little bit of an intro to yourself?
Sure, thanks for having me. I'm Izabela. I am a newly registered midwife in Ontario. I did my education through McMaster University, which is one of two universities in Ontario that offer the midwifery education program. I would just like to put out a disclaimer that midwives in Ontario currently do not offer abortion care. So if anyone listening to this podcast is looking at that option, then I do encourage you to seek medical advice and counseling from a practitioner. It is a part of our education to understand how these services work and understand the process of an abortion and have these conversations with my clients should we need them. But again, if you're looking into potentially having this service for yourself, then please seek out medical care and get some counseling from your practitioner.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll start off with our very first question here. Can you explain what an abortion is?
So in simple terms, it's just a medical procedure to end a pregnancy. There are different types of abortions that are offered and can be done in Ontario. Most commonly, people hear of the medical abortion, so using medication for your uterus to expel the tissues of conception itself. And then there's that surgical abortion where a clinician will move those products of conception from the uterus. So there's those two different types of abortion, but essentially both are considered just a medical procedure to end the pregnancy.
Is there a specific time when either can be performed?
Yeah, so there is some constraints on medical abortion just because it is using a medication and your uterus itself is expelling these tissues. So it's similar to a miscarriage in that sense. That's how people kind of compare the process. That can be done between 7 to 10 weeks at most. And then we have our surgical abortions. Depending on the surgical procedure, those can be done up to 24 weeks in Canada legally. I believe that is the timeline.
Gotcha. Okay, and then can you explain then a little bit about the process of getting an abortion here in Ontario specifically, but if you're able to also comment on Canada? I don't know if that's sort of like you're out of your scope since you're only licensed here.
The process in Ontario, essentially we are a bit lucky, I would say, in Ontario. There's lots of cities that do offer abortion services, but unfortunately there is some constraints in terms of when, in what time frame these clinics in these certain cities can offer these abortions and what type. So some off the top of my head, I know Brampton, Hamilton, London, Kitchener, Waterloo, Oshawa, lots of, across the GTA. But it is very specific to what that clinic can offer. I believe if we are looking for something up to 24 weeks, which is what I said is kind of the most that is done in Canada, then we're looking at only getting services from London. Right. So it is dependent on your situation, but I say that for the most part, if you're living in and around major cities, then there is a good chance that your major city has an abortion services. How that looks like is essentially there would have to be a confirmation of pregnancy. This is done through often what people know at home as well, urine sample, ultrasound, and also taking history, your menstrual history to determine, is there confirmation in pregnancy? Is this pregnancy confirmed to be in the uterus? And how many weeks gestation are we approximating this pregnancy to be? And that will, based on that, your clinician will provide a conversation in terms of what is the best option for you. I would say this is kind of like your first session is counseling and education and confirmation of pregnancy, depending on which method you would find best suitable for you through that conversation with you and your practitioner. Then that is dependent on how many more sessions you would have. So for medical abortion, often you would just be able to start that day if you choose to do so, but there's that conversation of pros and cons. A lot of people like how a medical abortion is very private, something that you can do at home, and that is good for anyone that does have some concerns surrounding their reproductive health and just want that privacy due to any personal history of such. Some cons of that is that it does require a bit more follow-up. Most tissue will expel within 24 hours, but it can take up to 4 to 5 days. So people don't like kind of going through that experience for a long time. So maybe that's not the option for them. And it does require following up with their practitioner to ensure that all the products have been expelled and confirming that there is no pregnancy anymore. And then you have your surgical option, which is, I say, is more your quote unquote one and done option, just because you book a procedure date, you go in for the procedure, and then for the most part, unless there is a complication, then you know that there has been expellation of that pregnancy. And essentially, sometimes there would be 1 or 2 follow-up sessions just to ensure that you're feeling well. People like that because often pain management options are provided. There's less visits, and the procedure itself is quick. It can be about 15 minutes. The cons of that can be that it can feel invasive. It can trigger trauma responses to people. And one thing to know is that you can't drive yourself home after procedure, so that can limit that service to some people too. So essentially how that process looks is dependent on what type of abortion is best suitable for you in your situation.
All right, and I guess just to end off here, can you maybe mention some resources that you've come across that could be helpful for folks seeking information?
Yes, of course. A couple resources I've come across in my education. Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights does have good resource in terms of what available resources are for you, and dependent on which province you live in. There's Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada that also has a list of resources and support services. And because I have learned and worked in the Hamilton region, I do know of an excellent service that's offered in Hamilton and Toronto called Birthmark. They are a group of doulas, but they also offer abortion doulas. So that is a free service, self-referral. They like to especially target help for people of the LGBTQ community, minorities and such. And they essentially offer that emotional support that you may not be able to receive from your family and friends or whatever your social circle is. So that is a good resource for those living in that area if they need it.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much, Izabela, for your input.
Thanks for having me.
So bringing it back now to a Canadian context.
What it means, I think, to Canadian law. I think is,
So in Canada, abortions, or the whole concept of abortions and access to abortion services, has a little bit of a similar rooting, I guess, as it does in the United States, about like how it originally started to be legalized, but then it took a very different turn because Canadians have, or I guess the Canadian judicial system has different ideologies about how it should be governed. But Junior, you want to give a little bit of a overview on that in the notes that are right there?
So I zoned out. Were we doing the history?
The history,
I was like, damn. Okay, so basically, it's a long history, okay? It starts really from in 1969, when the Liberal government permitted abortions under certain circumstances.
Belinda's come off my beverage.
So abortions were to be provided only in a hospital if a committee of doctors decided that continuing the pregnancy might endanger the woman's life or health. So similar to what the Roe versus Wade prior to that occurring, right? But fast forward to 1970, when the Vancouver Women's Caucus organized a caravan to travel from Vancouver to Ottawa as a national feminist protest to liberalize the abortion law.
That's so cool.
That is really cool.
That's very like femme.
Femme. Sorry, I'm gonna hold them a drink. And so in 1982, Canada enacted the Charter of Rights and Freedom. And so basically any law found contravening, am I reading this right? Sorry.
Yeah, you're right.
I have motion sickness.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not you, it's me. Those rights could be struck
Why
down.
did I apologize? I have nothing to do with your vertigo, but continue, sorry.
Those rights could be struck down as unconstitutional. In 1988, the Supreme Court of Canada struck down the Canada's abortion law as unconstitutional. Awesome. The law was found to violate Section 7 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms because it infringed upon a woman's right to life, liberty, and security of person. So it's all, again, also similar to the U.S., where it was, what was I trying to say? It infringed upon a woman's right to privacy there, right?
Yeah.
Versus here, ours is life, liberty, and a security of person.
Yep.
Chief Justice Brian Dixon wrote that forcing a woman by threat of a criminal sanction to carry a fetus to term unless she meets certain criteria unrelated to her own priorities and aspiration is a profound interference with the woman's body and thus a violation of her security of the person.
Yeah.
As he should, King. So then Canada became one of a small number of countries without a law restricting abortion. So abortion was now treated like any other medical procedure and was governed by provincial, territorial, and medical regulations. Fast forward to in 1989, when the Supreme Court actually ruled that a father has no legal right to veto a woman's abortion decision. This ruling came after the boyfriend of a woman obtained a court injunction preventing her from getting an abortion. So by the time the case was settled, though, she had already secretly obtained an abortion in the U.S. The legality of abortion in Canada continues to be an ongoing and high debate in government, despite its legality across all stages of pregnancy, regardless of the reason. Access to services and resources varies across region. There's also one thing where I thought was really important was with the Nova Scotia.
You mean what about Nova Scotia?
So there's essentially it's also very interesting to point out that the way that these laws are written and the specific wording that's used originally in Nova Scotia, correct me if I'm wrong, it used to say how abortion was allowed if it was done by specifically a healthcare practitioner in what is the OBGYN. I was trying to say, I was like OBGYN, or basically underneath that department, or had specialty.
Yeah.
Whatever in that department, they were only able to do that, and it had to also have writing by 2 doctors.
Yeah.
So it was while abortion was considered allowed, it was also a lot of I would say barriers to getting an abortion. Fast forward to now, where they had changed it to essentially saying abortions are allowed in a hospital setting.
Yeah.
And that is fine. I was supposed to say, you're going to a lot of dead ends.
I am.
Interesting.
done a lot of
UIs.
That's it.
Okay, but now I think what's really important is to talk about maybe how it affects Canadians.
Yeah.
Would you like to provide some insight on that, Sohnia?
Sure. So, in Canada, right, there's, even though we have pretty much, like, unequivocal rights to abortion and accessing abortion services, just because that right exists or has been granted, if you will, it's not equitably accessible. So most abortion care clinics across Canada are only accessible to those in urban settings. So often, oh my god, there's another dead end.
You went to that one.
I just went to that one. Anyway, so yeah, they're only accessible in urban settings, or predominantly. So, because they're not oftentimes a lot of folks can't access abortion services in urban settings because they live in rural areas or very remote areas. They go to the U.S. because that's more accessible for them to access those services.
Especially for those who live on the border,
Yeah,
right?
that live in border areas. However, because that's no longer going to be possible in certain areas, it's going to limit a lot of Canadians' ability to access abortion services.
I also think there was another thing where no providers in Canada offer abortion beyond 23 weeks and 6 days.
Yeah.
So when they are beyond 23 weeks and 6 days, many Canadians end up traveling to the U.S. to access services with little guidance or support from their government. So that's also an impact of how it can affect Canadians. Because, again, like Sonia said, there are Canadians that do travel to the U.S. to obtain these services.
But in Ontario, or at least in like the GTA, for example, we're pretty fortunate that in the event if, you know, anyone that we ever know, or God forbid, you know, that situation comes up and they need to access abortion services, they have the liberty of doing that. In the Maritimes, it's so restricted. I think in New Brunswick, there's only 2 places that you can access abortion services, and that's in a hospital in Moncton, and then another hospital in another major city. I think I wrote that down.
Bathurst.
Bathurst. It's Moncton and Bathurst, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so those in New Brunswick, that's the only place you can really access those services. Remember the article that you were reading before?
Of what?
It's like the life before Roe versus Wade. It was basically saying that, like, the current healthcare system, pretty much like all doctors and all people don't know what life is before
Oh, yes,
what
okay.
it was, and it like spoke about what women used to do.
Yes. So basically in the US, it was saying how like Roe versus Wade has established approximately 50 years ago, let's say. I think the number they used in the article was like 47 years. But the median age of physicians in the US is 51 years. So basically they were arguing how the physicians nowadays don't know life before Roe versus Wade, right? Which is very interesting, right? So they don't know what it means to not have abortions allowed, from my understanding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like saying, like, basically like the ramifications of what's to come from women trying to access or perform like underground quote unquote abortions is like a gray zone that can, sorry, there's speed bumps. Whoa, okay. Anyway, there's what am I trying to say? Yeah, it's like a gray zone, and before abortions were legalized, there was a lot of ways women would perform abortions that were not necessarily like sanctioned or by the government, so they were like underground.
Yes.
And there's some like pretty horrific things that they had to do in order to perform abortions.
I was reading one of these things where it was like back in the day when like abortions were not legal, women would travel to countries where you could get abortions, or they would be paying like over $1,000 to get these abortions, and if they didn't have $1,000, then these physicians or whoever were doing these abortions basically refused. Or even there was times where male physicians would ask for sexual favors prior to giving an abortion.
A big bump. But that's wild. I also read stuff about like women drinking bleach or performing, this is a little graphic, but performing coat hanger abortions, which I'm sure you could imply about like what it is, but yeah.
And I think that is also fear for how moving forward. I think we should really focus on like what it means now, right? What does it mean for women, especially in the states where abortions are banned? Any final thoughts, Sohnia?
I think that was an interesting discussion, and it's definitely going to be an open discussion, right?
For sure.
You know, we're always learning, so the manner in which we communicated stuff today may have not been the most effective.
Yes.
But the whole point of doing this podcast, right, is for us to improve our knowledge translation skills. So if you have any comments or suggestions on how to better communicate what we said, let us know. If we're wrong, let us know. Yeah.
If you don't agree with us, let us know. Also, if you did not like this carpool podcast, let us know.
Yeah, it's sure the audio when I'm editing is going to be disgusting.
Just a whole lot of bumps. But it was an interesting podcast to do. I definitely think so. This was really funny because Sonia and I had a whole different idea coming in today's podcast of what to record. But I was telling Sonia basically from my standpoint where I was like, again, I was on Instagram seeing everyone repost the, in support of like, or against abortion and like against the ruling and stuff. And I was like, I felt like I wasn't doing anything by not posting anything. But I also felt like me posting something is not me doing something. And I wanted to do something about it. And then I realized, I have a platform where I could speak about this.
Your turn.
Again, I have a platform to speak about this. And I thought, why not? Right?
Yeah.
And that's why I was like, Sonia, what if we talk about abortions today?
Yeah, and it was a solid 12 out of 12 idea.
12 out of 12.
I learned a lot.
Yeah, I honestly have to say so too, because I think Sonia and I was making the joke too, like, we really looked into the Roe versus Wade.
Yeah. Okay,
Oh.
you can, or you're not? Okay. Oh, your turn.
But
He started rolling, and I was like, are you going to go or not? Are you going to cut me off? Anyways.
But yes, thank you guys for tuning in. Any final thoughts, Sonia?
Today's weather is a high of 22 degrees.
Anyways, bye!